Chapter 5. 183. Web of Lies. It had taken Sonny a lot of time to understand what Mordred was doing, and why. But in the end, he had succeeded, and thus managed to predict what the elusive prince was going to do. Or at least do it with a sufficient degree of certainty to stake his life on it in this desperate situation. Just like everybody else, Sonny had been fooled at first. The initial revelation he had received had to do with the brutal murder of the two guards. It was then that he realized that Mordred was not as insane and perverse as everyone seemed to think. Mordred's grotesque brutality was not the result of an irresistible, unhinged, and sadistic compulsion. Instead, it was a cold and calculated strategy that the prince had employed to diminish his enemies, break their spirit, and make their souls susceptible to his attacks. He had weaponized terror itself, and made good use of it. After all, people were most scared of that which was unknown, and what was more unknowable than the mind of a deranged, murderous madman. After Sonny realized that there was such a possibility, the next step was both simple and hard to take. He had to take a good look at himself, and admit that he himself had fallen victim to this tactic. Mordred had gotten under his skin. Sonny was more resilient to deceit and manipulation than most, but he was also more vulnerable to the schemes of the Prince of Nothing. Their enmity was personal, and as such, involved powerful and destructive emotions. Humiliation, resentment, the sense of betrayal. Such emotions were the enemy of clarity. Sonny had allowed his mind to be clouded by them, and through them, by fear. So he had to separate his emotions from his perception of the situation, knowing that some of them were a dire obstacle, and some were engineered by Mordred in order to obfuscate the truth. Once he did, it was as though a veil had fallen from his eyes. Without it, several things became apparent. The first one was that Mordred was not as terrifying as he wanted everyone to think. Sure, he was astonishingly powerful for an awakened, and equally as lethal. Enough so for Sonny to suspect that the prince possessed a divine aspect. If he and Nephis could, why not Mordred? He didn't know how many soul cores Mordred possessed, but if his aspect was indeed similar to theirs, there had been much more time for the former heir of valor to accumulate soul fragments and grow stronger. This could also explain why his power level was so anomalous. In any case, it didn't matter. Regardless of how powerful Mordred was, he was clearly not powerful enough to obliterate his jailers completely. Otherwise, they would have been already dead. In fact, Sonny suspected that the Prince of Nothing was in the exact same situation as he himself was. Sonny could take on one of the masters, maybe even both of them, with Cassie's help and a lot of luck. He also stood a chance in the battle against the surviving Lost. But he couldn't fight them all together, and neither could Mordred. It was not an accident that the guards had been killed in the usual brutal and ghastly fashion, but the wounded sentinels simply had their throats cut. The murderous prince had not abandoned his barbarous ways on a whim. He simply wasn't capable enough to do more unnoticed. Mordred was not all-powerful, just very, very good. The second realization came thanks to the first one, after the two wounded sentinels had been killed, and the crowd of their comrades was hungry for Sonny's blood. Back then, he briefly considered running away, despite the fact that Pierce and Weltha would certainly pursue, and this was it. At that moment, he understood Mordred's true goal. It was not to single out Sonny, separate him from the Lost, and possess his body. No, what the prince wanted was to separate the Lost from each other with Sonny's unwilling help, so that he could kill them, divided. Which didn't mean that he had no plans for Sonny's body, only that he wasn't aiming for it yet. After Sonny understood Mordred's immediate goal, one last thing became apparent. It was that the murderer was indeed already among them. Only he wasn't hiding inside Sonny, as the Lost suspected. Instead, he was hiding inside one of them. This mystery tormented Sonny for a while. How could this be? After all, Pierce and Weltha weren't fools. They had a reason to be confident in their soldiers, and that reason was that none of the sentinels had interacted with a mirror or any sort of a reflection after Mordred's last vessel had been destroyed. Everyone was careful, and watchful of their comrades to keep them safe, too. How could he have possessed one of them, then? The answer was both simple and frightening. Sonny understood it after thinking about the sentinel who had brought food and water to their cage, then lost his mind and tore out his own eyes. The eyes were the mirror of the soul, after all. Locked in a small room with Cassie, Sonny couldn't help but notice his own reflection in her beautiful eyes. Seeing his own face staring back at him from their depths, he shuddered. Mordred didn't need a mirror to enter someone's soul. Every human in the Night Temple was a walking mirror. They just didn't know it. Not by chance, but by design. The banished prince had purposefully kept this facet of his power hidden, only using the mirrors and mundane reflections to take vessels, thus creating a false impression that this was the only way he could achieve it. He was a devious monster, indeed. Sonny kept this dreadful guess to himself and tried to deduce who among the lost was the real murderer. He considered both Pierce and Weltha, then the only wounded sentinel to survive. Using him as a vessel was just insidious enough for a fiend like Mordred. But then, he entertained the idea that Mordred had not chosen his victims randomly. He had the ability to kill people inside the stronghold, to a much more terrifying effect. So why target the guards first? One of the murdered guards had been a familiar face. The Lost, who had an aspect that allowed him to see the unseen, like Sonny's shadow hiding in the darkness. Or peer through the veil of invisibility that the female sentinel who had almost cut Sonny's throat invited him to see Weltha and Pierce, and even escorted him and Cassie to the bathroom could create. Yes. Sonny was almost sure that Mordred was hiding in her body. This was how he had been able to kill the two guards, and later the two wounded, without being seen or heard. The answer was so obvious. The simplest solution was most often the correct one, after all. And so Sonny had predicted what was going to happen. Mordred had pushed Pierce and Weltha into action. With their forces dwindling by the day, and no definitive information on when St. Cormac would arrive, the masters could not simply wait. He lured them into leaving the stronghold to take Sonny away, thinking that they were luring Mordred into a trap instead. And while they were gone, the surviving Lost had no one to protect them from the monster hiding in their ranks. Well? They suddenly looked up, her face growing pale. Her lips trembled. No. Sonny lowered his head and suppressed a dark smile. At that moment, the masters finally understood what he had known for a while, but it was too late. Utterly and irrevocably late.